Hey, what's going on, everyone? Once again, Baddest Chaplain here with you, hoping all is well with you and yours. Today's a very special episode. I get to sit down with one of my heroes, one of my mentors, one of my favorite people on the planet, Dr. Brenda Flanagan. Dr. Flanagan, how are you?
Okay, we're nearing the end here. I have four more essays to grade and then I'll be done.
There it is. There it is. On your way to wrapping up the semester.
Yeah, wrapping up the semester.
We were talking over the last couple of weeks, and you were telling me about this really incredible project you have going on, and I just want to know more about this collaboration you have with Hannah Wysarova. How did that come about?
Well, I have to tell you, last week this time, Hannah and I were both at UCLA.
Hmm.
After the New York gig, we were invited to give a talk about Eva and Ada at UCLA, and it was sponsored in part by the Slavic department,
Right.
as well as the Czech consulate out in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And we had a great time. I can't believe that a week has gone by since then. But I'll tell you, Hannah and it's interesting how this collaboration came about. I had been going to the Czech Republic for a number of years. The American Embassy in Prague, knowing of my interest in Czech writers and especially in surrealism and all of that, and my the person at the State Department way back then who was interested in programming me around the world suggested I should do a talk at the Cultural Center at the American Embassy in Prague. And so I went there, and a wonderful cultural affairs officer, the local one, Maketa Kolorova, who has, for the last God knows how long, has turned out to be a very good friend.
Yeah.
Um, she arranged for me to do a reading and all of that in at the embassy, and she invited local faculty and people who were journalists. And one of the people she invited was Hannah. Now, Hannah at the time was also teaching at, because in the Czech Republic, you got to do a lot of stuff.
Right. Right. Right.
It's like we West Indians, we have to do three or four jobs,
Of
right?
course.
So one of her jobs was to teach at Anglo American University. And I had also been hired to teach in the summer at Anglo American University to teach creative writing. But Hannah was also a reporter for Respect magazine, which is sort of the equivalent of Time magazine for the
Wow.
United
Wow.
States.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as a journalist, she was intrigued by the fact that here I was, a very different person from the people, who
For
were
sure.
surrealists in Czech Republic, and that I was doing all this research about women. And she also had a keen interest in not surrealism so much, but in women writers.
Yeah.
And she liked my story because I remember telling the story of how I came to meet Eva Schrankmayerova. In any case, Hannah decided that she wanted to do a story on me for Respect magazine, and she did, and it came out. And then she got a job at University of Nebraska at Lincoln.
Okay.
And so we kept in touch. And she introduced me to Edda, and I visited Edda's home and all of that in Prague. And then we decided, you know what? We should do a book together. We should
Yeah.
do a book not just on on Eva, but just a book on both of them
Yeah.
because these women, I mean, I think Edda had a little bit more of a people in the United States, in some parts of the United States where Czech people live, knew a little bit more about Eder than they did about Eva as a
Got you.
writer.
Hmm.
Eva was known as a collaborator with her husband, Jan Schrankmeyer,
Hmm.
who, according to Zoran Kuzmanovich, is the Steven Spielberg of Central Europe.
Man.
That's how big Jan
Yeah.
is. And so that's how I met Hannah, and we began collaborating, and it took us a while. She went to a conference and she met an editor, and she talked to the editor about the possibility of a book. But then she got involved with all kinds of things, and you know me, I got involved with other things.
Of
And
course.
then finally we decided, you know what, 2022 late 2021. We got to do this.
Yeah.
And we were so fortunate because 3 weeks after we sent in the proposal to, which is really a very top notch publishing house,
Yes.
Rowan and Rowan is really one of the top publishing houses in the United States. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
3 weeks later, we got a yes.
Wonderful.
And then, of course, we had to get to work. Hannah came, I think, 3 or 4 times, and I did a week's work of writing retreat at my house,
Right.
and we put the book together.
There it is. There it is. So like, what was it about their story that really just like held you and said like, we have to keep this,
What
we have
was
to
it
let this
about?
be known? Like Ida and Eva.
Eva's was first introduced to Eva's work, Eva Schrankmayerova's work. I was,
Hmm.
I love reading and I love
Absolutely.
books. And I first went to the Czech Republic, I think it was it was the year 2000,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so it was like about 10 years or so after the fall of
For the Berlin Wall.
the wall,
Uh-huh.
and after what we might call the pseudo breakup of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And one of the things I have made a habit of doing, no matter what country that I go to, I always ask about women writers. And I was
Yes.
particularly interested in finding out about women writers in the Czech Republic because these people had lived under Soviet rule, and the
Right.
Soviets had real good propaganda about the ways in which women were equal and they treated
course.
women equally and all of that. And I said, okay, well, I need to find out who are these women who are living equally as men and
Right.
who are publishing, because as you know, publishing for many women and especially women who look like me
Come on.
are, it's still a problematic situation in the United States.
Mhm.
And so I went with a group of academics and I just left them, and I would
Yeah.
go, I tend to roam about on my own, which is
For
not
sure.
always a safe thing.
That part.
Um, I went roaming about Prague, and every little bookstore I came to, I would say, who are the women writers?
Yeah.
Especially, I was not so much interested in short story writers. I was interested in novelists.
Yeah.
And people would say, oh, well, we have male novelists, we have Kafka, we have
Yeah.
Milan Kundera. I said, I
Mhm.
know about these people.
Right.
I want to know about women. And
Yeah.
nobody had anything. And then one
Mhm.
day I was in Old Town, and I think it was the day before we were supposed to go off to Poland. And I went into this little bookstore. I had to go down into a little dive,
Come on.
And the guy said, yes, we have a book, and it's called Baradla Cave. It was translated into English
Okay.
from Czech
Yeah.
by an American named Gwendolyn Albert. And then he looked at me and he says, but is surrealist. And I said, great.
Yeah. Like, I have to warn you, it's
Because he was
surrealist.
saying, I don't know if you didn't
Yeah.
really understand it. But I had an interest in surrealism for many years because
Mhm.
of Aimé Césaire.
Of course.
Aimé Césaire, as you know, had a keen interest in surrealism, and a lot of his work that has been translated into English. I think some of the people who translated it didn't fully understand the surrealist
Right.
bent of it. But anyway, I knew about surrealism, and of course, everybody knows about Dali and all these people. So I got the book, and for the rest of the journey, we went to Poland and then we went back to the United States. I tried to read this book.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm an intelligent person,
No doubt about
right?
it.
I love to read. I
Yeah.
could not understand this story.
Come on.
Chris, this thing blew my mind.
Yeah.
I could understand the English words,
Right.
but there weren't any, the style of it was really surrealist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nothing about it for me made sense. And then I realized there are lots of sort of vague allusions and references. And I said, you know what? I have to know something about Czech history. Then I started reading up about Eva
There it is.
Schrankmayerova myself.
Yeah.
And I realized that I love the way this woman thought.
Mhm.
I want to get to the heart of this book.
Right.
And in order to understand it, I would have to know Czech history, not just Czech history, but Czech geography,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. Right.
topography of the
For
country.
sure.
I would also have to understand something about the topography of her mind.
Mhm.
Because while I knew academically a little bit about surrealism, I didn't know, however, what kind of things that she did. And then I started looking at some of Jan Schwankmeyer's
Mhm.
films, and then I realized that she was the artist for most of his films. And while everybody who, are into those kinds of films knew about Jan was
Right.
very famous,
Right.
very few people knew about Eva's work. So Eva was still in the background. So anyway, to fast forward, I found out about a conference that was going to be put on in 2002 in Pilsen, the
Okay.
beer capital of Czech.
Right. 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 Right.
And so I dared myself, I challenged myself. I said, I'm going to go and present a paper on this book. And I
Wow.
knew there would be people who they are Czech people,
Right. They know this
and
backwards and
Slovak
forwards. Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I felt I wanted to see what the response would be
Right.
to what I was doing. So I went. I think all the days I was at the conference, I only saw one other person who looked like me.
I believe
And she
it.
was married to a Czech
A Czech
person.
person.
Anyway, so people were rather intrigued
Sure.
that I, not only an American, but somebody from the Caribbean,
Right.
was not only fascinated with Eva Schrankmayer, but wanted to do this thing on surreal on a book that they couldn't understand, many of
Right.
them. But before I went to the conference, something miraculous happened. So I'm in Prague. I landed in Prague, and I had 2 days before I would go to take the train to Pilsen.
Hmm.
No, well, 2 days and the weekend. So I liked, as I tell you, I like to walk about.
No
So I
doubt.
was walking about in Narodní Třída, and I came upon the British Council. The site has moved. Back then, they had a lovely place in Narodní Třída, which is a very central part of the city,
Got you.
and they had books for you to go and read and all of that. So I went into the British Council, and at the desk, the front desk, first of all, beautiful bouquet of flowers,
Mm.
and then this smiling lady, and she asked, I said, she asked me, she welcomed me and asked me what I was doing in Prague and all of that,
Right.
and I told her, I'm there to do a conference in Pilsen, but I would really love to meet Eva Schwankmajer. I said, I've looked her name up. I don't know Czech. I could only do the salutations because everywhere I go, I try at least to do the salutations.
Right. Something casual.
And I said, I don't know how I could get in touch with her because I hear she doesn't speak much English. And this wonderful woman, whose first name is Daniela, said, Oh, I know Eva. Got on the phone and called Eva Schwankmajer.
That is
I'm
miraculous.
telling you, this is a spiritual thing
It
going on
really
here.
is. It
And
really
she
is.
told Ever, and Ever answered the phone. And she told Ever about me. And Ever was enthralled
Yeah.
and asked me to meet her. I think that was a Friday. Asked me to meet her and a group of surrealists, including her husband, at Café Montmartre, where they would gather. The surrealists had a special table in the back of the cafe,
I love this.
and beer and cheese, and they
Right.
would come and show their work and exchange their work
Exchange.
and all of that, right? And she wanted me to come and meet her there. And I think that's one of the first pictures in our book. It was
Yeah.
a very bad picture, a very bad photograph,
Like
but
bad
we had
lighting
to have
probably
it.
in there. Or I was
Yeah.
about to say, is this not like a
And so I went and met Eva and met Jan, and that's how our relationship began.
It's
And
awesome.
Eva had told Jan to get somebody who would speak English, because even though Eva understood English and could speak English, she preferred to converse in Czech.
Right. Right.
And so there were a couple members, younger members of the Surrealist group who spoke English, so they were there. So we had a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I went away determined that I had to write a book about this woman, and I had to write
Absolutely.
a book about the book,
About the book itself.
because
Yes.
the book itself deserves a book of its own.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I went to Pilsen. As I said, I had got a good reception. People didn't know what to make of me.
Yeah.
You know, that's not new.
But it seems like even though they were kind of confused that you were interested, they were excited, right?
They
It sounds
were,
like they were excited.
because first of all, they were, nobody said anything vis-a-vis race about it.
Right, right, right.
I could see in their eyes that men, surrealism is not easy to understand. So I think they were curious about not only my understanding of uh, the book, which came after a year and a half, right? And still, there are things that I don't fully understand, but also my curiosity about Eva Schrank-Meierhofer.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I felt was really important about this book and about Eva and about the surrealists, I thought the whole communist atmosphere itself
Right.
was almost conducive to surrealism.
I
You
believe it.
know? And that was one of the points I was trying to make in my paper. And I think people were intrigued by that. And, it was not that long, after the breakup, and there were people who were still sensitive about the subject, about
Absolutely.
totalitarianism and communism and all that.
Right.
And so I think they looked at me with a little bit of, she's
Yeah.
very brave to come here
Right.
and to talk about these issues. But that started my friendship with Eva. And so every year after that, I tried to go back to the Czech Republic to
Yes.
interview Eva. Um, she invited me to her home. We did lengthy interviews, and I found out that she had a cancer. She died actually in 2005.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And
Okay.
so that's how it all began. And
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
I sort of became a non-paying member of the Czech
That's right.
Surrealist group.
Honorary member.
Right, right, right. And I interviewed, in order to understand Eva as well, I
Yeah.
thought it would be helpful to interview members of the group.
Right.
And also, I wanted to interview women who were not part of the Czech Surrealist group. So I could balance what I was understanding about Eva, about her life, and why she wrote what she wrote, and why some women didn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So
But
I'm gone on too long,
no,
probably.
no, no. This has all been great because it makes me think about just that. What I believe is always true about good art is that if you're so specific, you tap onto this universal thread, and it just
Yes.
seems like she was not writing this story for anyone outside of what was then Czechoslovakia, the
Right.
now the Czech Republic.
Right.
She wasn't writing that story for us in the
No.
West, but it still drew you in and
It
resonated.
really resonated with me. And her life story resonated with me as well,
Yeah.
Chris. Because even though Eva was born in 1940, I was born in 1946. Eva was born in an entirely different country to mine. She had an upbringing that was entirely different to mine. Well, not so entirely. She hated her mother, and I didn't hate my mother, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But there were things about her. She had a kind of fearlessness about her that I
Hmm.
loved. She couldn't stand people who wanted to do things and were hesitant to do it. Even during moments when I would be apologizing for all the questions I was asking her because I could see she was getting weary at times.
Sure,
She'd
sure,
say,
sure.
"Stop it. If you want to do it, just do it. Stop
Yeah.
apologizing." And the other thing that attracted me to her is the fact that she was a woman who had spent, all her adult life working for her husband
Yeah.
and sort of beneath her husband.
Yeah, yeah.
I think is just, and I love Jan,
Mhm.
and he's very much alive. He's 90. Just
Wow, okay.
yeah. Every time I go to the Czech Republic, we talk, and I go and visit him. But her work was not recognized, and
Yeah,
as Jan's was.
right.
And I mean, in this man's world,
Yeah.
people would write about Jan, but they wouldn't write about her. There's this huge book called The History of Surrealism.
Mhm.
Jan is mentioned, Ever isn't even mentioned. And I said, to
Wow.
Hannah, this has to stop. We
Yeah.
have to give this woman her due. And I promised Ever that I would write the book about her. And I mean, for me, it was a spiritual undertaking. I say that not lightly
No, no,
because I don't think things in my life happen coincidentally.
I
I
hear that.
think these things are supposed to happen.
Right.
I learned so much about her, and I learned about
Yeah.
resilience. Um, it has not been easy for me as a
Yeah,
professor at a certain college,
for sure.
but I think of whatever an Edda and these women experienced under totalitarianism. And I'm not saying my situation was,
No, no, no.
similar to theirs, but there are touch points, right?
For sure.
Um, and what I learned is that you have to be resilient and you have to have faith in yourself. Even when no one else has faith in you,
Right.
you have to have faith in yourself, you know?
Absolutely.
And when um, Eva had two brothers, I had seven. And Eva always wanted to do what her brothers were doing.
Of course.
Always wanted to do what men
Right.
were given opportunities to do.
Exactly.
And that endeared her to me
For
because
sure.
I was the same way when I was growing up.
Yeah.
I wanted to beat pan. I
Yes.
wanted to sing calypso.
Yes.
I wanted to dance limbo.
Right.
And all of those things were not activities that proper young women were
Right.
supposed
Right.
to engage in
Mm-hmm.
Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
I did them all though.
Of course. Yeah.
But I remember my mother was aghast and called me names in the middle of the street.
Come
I'll never
on.
forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because somehow I was making the family shame, you know? And so Eva had to overcome a lot of those barriers,
Mm-hmm.
those gender barriers.
For sure.
And one of the reasons she, in her so many of her paintings and even in her fiction, her long fiction, she makes fun of male
Yeah.
genitalia and the male body.
Right.
It's not that she wasn't gay or anything like that.
No.
She
No. No.
just wanted to be allowed the same opportunities as Jan had,
Yeah.
or as any man had, right?
Right.
And even though the government was constantly, touting this business about
Sure.
equality,
Sure.
equality, and all of that, it was a lot of bull because in
Yeah.
reality it was not.
Right. It
So,
wasn't a lived experience.
yes, yeah,
Now, because it makes me think about how much so much of how power works is that it makes whoever is at that privileged location just normal. And so a lot of the things that should just be normal for any person to want, we've gendered them and said, no, only boys can do this, only men can do this. But it's like, why can't
yes.
I have a critique of society? Why can't I play masa or do calypso and all these things? So I think so much of these things that are just like normal human activity get gendered and now become something you are oppressed with. You know what I
Right.
mean?
So, okay, you have lots of questions. I want to talk about maybe Edda for a little bit
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
because Edda is still very much alive.
Wonderful.
And last God, time flies so quickly. March, I think, the Anglo American University in Prague invited me to come and do a reading from the book.
Yeah.
And Etta was there. If you want, I could even send you pictures. I
Love
could,
that. Would
yeah.
love that.
And it was lovely to see her again. Now, her life was actually, she and Eva were born in the same year.
Okay.
They were born in the same country.
Right.
But their lives took very different paths, right?
Okay.
They both ended up being writers, but different types of
For
writers.
sure.
Was a journalist
Hmm.
and became, after Havel became the first president,
Right.
she was the only woman in Havel's shadow cabinet
Wow. Wow.
because even then under Havel,
Right.
women didn't have a pronounced space, right? And public face. And she wrote short stories. She was banned. Her work was banned.
Wow.
Both Etta and Eva's work was seriously banned.
Come on.
And so they had to go underground. And we call that samizat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So most of their stories. So Etta lost her job as a journalist, but so then she had to find a job somewhere.
Yeah.
And so she took a job as working in an old folks home. So,
Okay.
a lot of the surrealist men I met, and some of them are still alive, the older guys, some of them were engineers, professors under communism because of what was perceived as their being bourgeois,
Right,
right?
right, right.
They were demoted. Some of them had to work as night watchmen in factories and all this sort of
Goodness.
thing.
Yeah.
So, if you didn't toe the line, oh my God, so very similar to certain things happening in the country
Come on.
today. We can talk about that later, but I can tell you that it's frightening.
Yeah, you
If
see
you
the
know
rhyme.
anything about totalitarianism, if you know anything about fascism, if you've studied what went on in places like the Czech Republic, like what was then Czechoslovakia,
Yeah.
you will be trembling
Sure.
about what's happening in the United States.
Sure.
But anyway, so some of Edda's most famous stories came out of when she was working
Mhm.
as in the old folks home. And in fact, my students in world literature have read Edda's work. One of them, it's a wonderful story about an old woman who is probably about my age.
Yeah.
And I'm an old person.
I thought you said it was an
So,
old woman.
yeah, who is very sexual, and
Come
the
on.
people, yes, the people in the nursing home don't know
No.
what to do with this old woman. It's called How Many Resurrections? But I'm telling you a little bit about her because one of the things Etta and Eva had to do was camouflage what they were writing about. So while on the surface, this is a story about an oversexed old woman in a
Right.
nursing home
Right.
who the nursing home people don't know how to deal with her,
Exactly.
trying to, clamp
Contain the
down her
situation.
desires and all of that.
Yeah.
It's really about the ways in which the body is corralled, the body and the mind under totalitarianism.
Yeah.
How it's that if you don't subscribe
Right.
to what to the
The
regime's
worldview
dictates,
gets
you know,
squeezed.
something is wrong with you. And
Yeah.
so reading that story and other works by her, you have to read it on at several levels,
Of
right?
course.
And your understanding of the story is enriched if you
Yeah.
know about Eda Krysiova, if you know when she wrote it and why she wrote it, I mean, we can read literature and just on the face of it, but you would lose a lot if you didn't know something about what Eda Krysiova was trying to do
Mhm.
with her stories. And so she suffered as well
Of
under
course.
totalitarianism. In writing her novel, and one of the things that um, amused and bemused and troubled me about Baradla Cave,
Mhm.
Eva Shrankmarova's novel, is that Eva wrote it over a number of years.
Yeah.
She started it and then stopped because she had two children.
Got you.
She didn't want children, by the way, but she had children.
Yeah.
And I'll
Yeah.
tell you a little bit about that in a minute. She has
Mhm.
a son and a daughter. And one of the things that she, as a surrealist, never did
Yeah.
was rewrite.
First take.
Whatever came out of her mind,
Yeah.
that was it.
Come on.
So you can well imagine the difficulty
Yeah.
in somebody who is used to reading, I call it cause and effect, consequential literature.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
what is the connection between this and that? What
Right.
is the connection between this Ludmilla, Frau Ludmilla, and the caves? I mean,
And it's just
it's something to blow your mind.
yeah,
But
just a trip.
that's in part why I was so curious about the mind of this woman who could create this work. And of course, she's also a poet.
Yeah.
And in the Surrealist group,
Mhm.
the magazine that they would put out for
Right.
years would sometimes have, when they realized that there would be an interest outside of Czechoslovakia,
Right.
they would have some of the work translated. So that was really helpful for me.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, it's because the translation. Now, here's the interesting thing. We never talk about this, but I love Hannah. It was,
Yeah.
I'm a creative writer,
No
and
doubt.
Hannah is an academic writer.
Okay. Okay.
So when you read the book, you will see that our styles are very, very different.
How do you make that work? Because these are very different
Our
modalities.
styles, the first half of the book is mine, the second half is hers,
Oh, okay. Got
right?
you. Got you. Got you. Uh-huh.
And so one of the things that I don't have to do as a fiction writer is, do the things that publishers want you to do. You have to make sure that they can sell the book digitally, right?
Right.
So you have to digitize quotes. And, oh,
Yes.
Jesus Lord, that was a problem for me.
I hear you. I hear you.
Um, Hannah can speak Czech, of course, because she was born in the Czech Republic. I do not speak Czech.
Yeah.
I can read a bit of Czech,
Okay.
but translating, that's why it took me so many years to
Of
get
course.
my most of my stuff done,
Yeah.
because I had to have an interpreter, a translator, and then I have to have a translator checking the translation, and then I had to have a friend who is a surrealist helping me
Come
check
on.
the translation.
Come
You
on.
see?
Yes. Triple filtered.
I mean, this was this was a labor. It was a labor of
Yeah.
love, but emphasis on labor.
Labor.
Through the whole process, I learned a lot about
Yeah.
patience.
Good.
I learned a lot about collaboration.
Right?
I love Hannah to death, but she and I have very, very different work ethics.
Of course. Yeah.
And I think some of her work ethics has to do with growing up in part under a system that
Of course.
made demands constantly.
Of course.
And people in Central Europe and including, I would say, Germany, they take their vacation time very seriously.
Yes, they do.
Hannah would want to take her 3 weeks to go off and vacation.
That's it.
Thinking, no way,
We got something to
we got
do.
the deadline.
Yeah.
For her, she also has 2 teenage children, and I was in a different position because my children are grown.
Right.
And I'm thinking, no, 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 no. We signed. We had a deadline.
That's it. We have to do this.
So she and I had that was part of the battle. But I have to say that my son and daughter really helped with the child, because my son lives in
I
Germany.
say, right.
And although he doesn't know Czech, he knows how to translate stuff.
For sure.
And so all this stuff, Hannah didn't translate any part of my work, which is interesting because I think a lot of people think that because Hannah is a Czech speaker and
Right.
I'm
That's
the English
what.
speaker, that Hannah was translating. No,
Yeah, but that wasn't
that did
happening.
not happen at all.
Yeah.
I did a lot of editing of her work, which is
Mhm.
fine.
Yeah.
Because she teaches Czech, and when you learn English, especially in the condition in which she learned English,
Right.
you learn sort of the grammatical English in a
Got you.
certain
Textbook.
way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was interesting collaboration, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth. Sometimes frustrating,
Sure.
but in the end, we were able to get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, you have so many
No,
questions.
no. We're flowing. Those questions are just there to kind of like refer to, and we've been touching on some of them, because I was gonna ask you, like, with that sort of exchange and partnership, did you find yourself bringing any of your cultural lens, like coming from the West Indies, into the work? Like, was there space for it, or was it just like, no, I have to look at this only through a Czech lens?
Well, that's interesting because one of the things coming from the West Indies, yes, but as a woman coming from the West Indies,
Yeah.
who, when I was growing up, I was terribly afraid to tell anybody I wanted to be a writer, right? Because people like me, I didn't know anybody like me who was a writer.
I hear
You
you.
are of a different generation.
Yeah.
And so if you had grown up in Jamaica, you might have heard about Lamming and
Hmm.
Nightfall and all of these people.
Yeah.
But remember, I grew up under British
That's
colonialism,
right.
which in itself was a kind of
I'm about to
totalitarianism,
say.
right? So we read
Yeah.
Shakespeare. we
Yeah,
read
right.
English text, and I desperately wanted to be a writer.
Yeah.
And I know that Eva wanted to do the same. She wanted to be a painter. She was a carver.
Come on.
She made ceramics. She wanted to be able to do all of these things as well.
Yeah.
And so even though, we come from, totally different parts of the world,
No question.
we were at one in our frustrations as we were growing up. I could
Absolutely.
imagine, her frustration as she was growing up, and I hope she could imagine mine,
Right,
right?
right, 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 right.
And so it's funny because so she had never been to Trinidad,
Yeah.
right? She knew anything about she knew a little bit about the West Indies, of course, and she certainly knew about America, but
Uh,
in a way we were so alike.
yeah, yeah.
It's really odd when the more I think about it, the more I realize because I don't want to use this whole messy term about universality, but
Got you.
when you're a female, when you're a woman in this world and you want to do things and you're capable of
Of
doing it,
course.
and the forces that be, whether they are your immediate parent
Right?
or the political structure under which you live, these structures are adverse to what you want to do. Something
Certainly.
happens to your soul, something happens to your mind. And I think Eva could see that in me,
Hmm.
and I could see that in her. And I think that's why she was so intrigued by
Right.
me and by where I'd come from and why I was interested in her work, and just in my life. So even though I'm from the Caribbean, I'm from Trinidad. We have to be careful about saying the Caribbean because, as you know, all these islands are different.
Very
But
different.
I
Right.
think the colonialism was pretty much the same.
Yeah. It's like the tie that binds.
Right. So we had we had that in common.
Yeah.
um but we also, I think, you asked me a question about truth telling.
Yeah.
And I'm not a paragon of virtue, but I really, and this has to do with ever being a dissident, and it's not a title that I have ever claimed for myself,
Got
but I
you.
think people who know me would say that I am,
It would nominate you.
because most of the trouble I've gotten into in academia or in
Yeah.
the rest of the world has been because, I've opposed the lies. And I
Yeah.
really wish people would start using that word, lies.
Bring it
Just
back.
be frank. This person is lying. This
Right.
person is a liar.
Right.
But we shade it with all kinds of metaphors and all of that, shading the truth. The hell is shading the truth? Shading the truth is
It's
lying.
lying. Right.
And so I think Eva was like that too. She couldn't tolerate
Yeah.
lies.
Right.
Um, and that's why she was so very frank about her life. People are sometimes surprised that I'm frank about my life.
Hmm.
And that's another thing we have in common. She hated her mother for a long, long, long time. And her husband, Ian, and even some of her friends would say that a lot of Eva's writing comes out of that sort of unresolved,
Right.
um, the problematics with her mother. Well, why did she hate her mother? Well, Eva had a brother who was killed in the war, right? And in the early 1940s.
Hmm.
So Eva's grandparents was left without any children.
Right.
Eva's mother, and she never really faulted her father that much for this, but Eva's mother sent her to live with her mother. And so Eva was separated from her mother, her
Right.
father, and her brothers.
Okay.
And although she liked, I would say even loved her grandmother and her
Uh huh.
grandfather, she couldn't understand why her mother would give her up.
Right. Right.
It
Right.
isn't as if she had sisters. So again, she saw her mother as preferring men, preferring
Yeah.
males.
Males.
You
Uh huh.
see? And what is it about a male child that is so grandiose that
Yeah.
and so welcoming and so wonderful that you would give up. You have two sons.
Right.
Why not send one of them to live
That's right, right, right.
with your mother?
Yeah.
Instead, you send your
The only
only daughter.
daughter. Yeah.
Well, I never knew Eva's mother, and there might have been problems with the mother herself.
Sure.
But no, Eva's dead. And Jan, when I go back to Prague this summer, I'm going to ask Jan about this because there are things, you sort of don't ask. But
Right,
I
right,
think
right.
it's time for me. We're friends enough, we're
Yeah,
family
close
enough
enough.
that I should ask. And Eva wrote a lot of diaries.
Okay.
Um, and she wrote a lot about her life in those diaries. Her daughter is refusing to allow many of those diaries to be printed. So I think those in those diaries we might have information about whatever we know she hated her mother because she's very out with that, but maybe more about her mother. And her brothers, when they would come to visit her, would tease her, and her father would bring her
Oh,
crayons and all of that.
sure.
um and because she's always loved to draw.
Mhm.
And she always thought that she was a better artist than her brothers, but of course it was her
But
brothers
yeah, they
who
got
were giving.
celebrated.
So there were a lot of family problems. And Yen, and other surrealists firmly believe that a lot of Eva's emotional conundrums
Sure, sure, sure.
can be linked to that absence of
Yeah,
a relationship, a loving relationship with her mother.
no doubt. No.
And she also had a kind of tense relationship with her brothers. However, it was due to one of her brothers that she actually met Jan.
Oh, okay.
Jan, of course, a little bit older than her. As I said, he just turned 90 and he
Yeah.
looks so vibrant,
Come on.
um, and she saw him. He was graduating from this art school that she was at in in Prague,
Mhm.
and she had seen his work and she wanted to meet him. So she contrived to get her brother to get
Yeah.
him near an elevator
Come on.
where she maneuvered to
That's
meet
right.
him.
That's right.
Because for her, this was the person she wanted to spend her life with, you know. And I have to say, I think Jan had, little had, as we say in the West Indies, maybe a deputy every once in a while,
Yeah.
but nothing that would have caused him to leave ever. And actually, when Eva died, Jan went into a very, very, very serious depression and
Sure.
had to be hospitalized himself
Yeah.
for many months. But there's a new retrospective.
Right.
There's so much going on. Eva is finally getting her due.
That's it.
And Hannah and I both feel that a lot of it has a result of our book,
Yeah.
because when somebody writes a book about you,
It kind of brings it back to the
right.
top. Right.
And so there's a wonderful retrospective of her
Wonderful.
work
Wonderful.
in outside of Prague this year, and then in September there's going to be a big exhibition again of her work.
Okay.
Um, anyway, yeah, so she's finally. I'm just so sorry that
He's not here for it.
she
Yeah.
couldn't live long enough to see it, but
I
she's finally getting her due.
she's getting her due and getting her flowers. And
Yes.
it makes you wonder though. The good thing is like with this coming out and the sort of moment that we're having, who knows which young woman can pick up your book or be exposed to her work and be inspired. Like, what is your hope for a young woman maybe who is aspiring to be a writer or is just a young woman trying to move through this world of misogyny? What is your hope for them as they read that book?
To be unafraid, and to understand that there will be obstacles. There will always be obstacles. And that's not only what endeared me to Eva, but it's what made me see her as a sister.
Yeah.
Because, I think that when I left Trinidad, I had not even finished high school,
Right.
right?
Right.
I could not tell anyone that I wanted to be a writer. It
Yeah.
was insane. People would have thought me insane.
No doubt.
But to have a belief in oneself amidst everything, amidst the state saying you shouldn't write this or you can't write this. The surrealist group that Eva and Jan joined in was perfect for her because these were all men.
Yeah.
They respected her enormously. And even though they called her on the QT, the mother of Czech Surrealism, they would never use the word mother with her, right?
Oh, right, right.
She didn't want to be perceived as that.
Yeah, right,
Um,
right, right, right.
but they admired and respected the quality of her work. And that didn't come from an easy place. That
Yeah,
came from, Eva would always say, I'm not political, but her work is political.
gotta
But I
be.
mean, it's something most dissidents say, I'm not
Right,
political.
right, 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 right.
But I would like a young writer to read this book and understand that belief in oneself is
Mhm.
paramount.
Yeah.
If you don't believe in yourself, if you don't, it's what should keep you going. And also read.
Come on.
Read other people's work.
Yeah.
Read different people's work.
Right.
This sounds kind of hokey and weird, but I don't know if I think I might have told a class that you were in, Chris, many years ago, that when I was about 10, 11 years old, I came across just a verse of a poem.
Yeah.
Do you remember? I did not know, I could not even remember for years and years who had written that verse.
Right.
I knew it was an American writer.
Right.
The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep.
Yes.
And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And Chris, I took my little copybook.
Come on.
Every time, school starts, you have a little copybook, and I wrote
Yeah.
those words.
Right.
Those words kept me alive, Chris. This may seem strange to people
No.
who don't understand the effect literature have on you.
Right.
Years later,
Yeah.
I'm a student at University of Michigan, scrolling through the 800s. I see this book, and I like the title, Walking Through the Woods on a Snowy Day, and I pulled it down,
Yes.
and I opened it. By now I have two children. I'm
Come
pregnant
on.
with one,
Yeah.
divorced.
Right. Right.
And I opened it, and the book fell open on this poem, and I found out this little old white man named Robert Frost in New Hampshire had written this poem. This man had never
Come
been
on.
to Trinidad.
No.
I didn't even know it was an old white man
Right.
who had written this poem. But those words had, Chris, you have no idea, those words had kept me alive through a horrible marriage,
Right.
through my husband telling me I would never amount to anything. I mean, through so much, Chris. Those words had kept me alive. And so, what I want young people to know is that it's important for us to read. Read
Absolutely.
beyond our immediate selves.
Yes.
Read other writers. I still have the Realism book.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
um, and I knew that when I read those words that I needed to go to America. In the 50s and 60s, we were all people in the West Indies were going
Right.
to England.
Exactly.
I never wanted to go to England. I wanted to go to America because I knew this guy was, I didn't even know he was a guy. I knew this poet was an American.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I would ever meet him or anything. If meet
Right.
him, I didn't know he was a man,
Right.
but I just felt drawn to this country. I came to this country in 1967. It was a time of upheaval in the United
Absolutely.
States.
Absolutely.
I had faith in this country, Chris.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I had faith in it is because I knew that many of us and people who look like me would have recourse to the
Mhm.
legal system.
Right.
And now that that's being cut away from us,
Come on.
I can understand the fear. But I think if people were in touch with writers who had lived under totalitarianism
Hmm.
more, and if they understood what it means to lose that freedom of expression,
Right.
to be afraid to go out.
Right.
Eva used to tell me how the police used to follow them.
Hmm.
In fact, she wanted to flee the country, and had tried even to come to the United States.
Right, right,
We've been
right.
turning over in her grave about this thing now.
Hmm.
And had fled to, of all places, Austria for a while.
Oh,
But
man.
Jan wanted to be back in
Firm,
his
right.
country and fight and keep writing. And
Yes.
so they came back. But she was afraid that her children, if something happened to her, someday who would take care of her children?
Right, right,
And she couldn't
right.
trust her mother to
No,
take care of her children.
come on.
And so um you know we need I would tell young people, read beyond your immediate interests. If you're
Yeah.
West Indian, if you're Jamaican, if you're Trinidadian, read the English novels, read Australian novels, read in Indonesian work.
Hmm. Hmm.
My shelves are packed with books, from all over the world. And every
Lovely.
once in a while I pull something down and I read, and I, yes, 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 yes. Get beyond our immediate and understand fully, well, as fully as possible, how the other lives.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Get beyond
I think
yourself.
we get rather myopic
Absolute.
in the United States. And we're mainly concerned about ourselves a lot, and maybe all of us are guilty of that in some way. But I know it's my curiosity about other writers, my curiosity about how other people live,
Hmm.
that has really contributed to my being alive and sane today. you
Certainly.
know
Certainly. No, that's all so necessary what you're saying, because I think people lack a curiosity now, and really just want to just turn everything into like little like gummy versions of life and knowledge. But I think what you're talking about is really what can help heal a lot of our situation, which is being curious about the other, being inquisitive, and being open to others' experiences and having
Yes.
compassion.
Yeah,
So thank
yeah.
you for that.
Because I I didn't understand. I didn't even know the word metaphor at age
Right.
11, but I knew that writer understood me.
Come on.
I knew whoever that was, because that's the way I was thinking about my life. My
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
I want to be a writer. I want to go away. I want to do things, but I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
cut down the bush, get through the jungle on my own. And I love the
That's it.
repetition, and miles to
To
go
go
before I
before I
sleep.
sleep.
Because that's the other thing I think a young people these days lack, is patience. You know, everything is short term. They want everything now.
Yeah.
It's no delayed gratification. And lots of times it takes time. I'm sad that, Eva got, in the last few years, she got some recognition,
Okay.
but as a result of her relationship and, with Jan's work.
Right, right, right.
But now it has come.
Yeah, yeah.
You
It's
know,
a moment.
you can read a lot about her and her writing, not just her paintings.
Yeah.
Jan has, where they live, they have, I would say, confiscated this old place in the
Say it.
country near the German border.
Yeah, yeah.
And Jan actually has like a museum. And in that museum, you find dozens and dozens and dozens of paintings by Ever.
Lovely.
And Jan also had a very deep interest in African sculpture.
Okay.
And so you'll see a lot of pieces
Yeah.
from West Africa
That's really cool
there.
too.
So there's that connection again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cause no, that's really it. What do you be like now that you're touring this book, and you're talking to folks about it? So twofold question: one, where can people get this book? And secondly, like what projects are starting to stir in your mind that you're like, okay, now I've done with this, I want to work on this
Right.
next.
Well, the book is available. Women's Artistic Descent. It's on I guess just put in Women's Artistic Descent, totalitarianism, the ways in which women, uh, dissented against totalitarianism pre 1909 Czechoslovakia, right?
Got you, got you,
It's
got you.
called Repelling Totalitarianism in pre 1989 Czechoslovakia. The book is hardcover, so it's still rather expensive.
Yeah.
So like
Mhm.
over $100. And
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think it's 117.
Oh man.
But it's a beautiful book. The
Yeah.
cover, Davidson colors, by the way.
Okay.
The cover is an original painting that ever did um, when as a samizat.
Got you. Got you.
She had given it to a very good friend of hers, Czech, who was prime mover and very important person in the Surrealist group, still is. She had given it to him to use inside a book of poems of his, and he allowed me to use it as a cover. If you look at the cover, it's a bit bawdy, but that's what Eva was all about. And so it's available. We're hoping that Bloomsbury, that has now taken over Rowan,
Hmm.
the press that we published with, will issue, soft cover, so
Right.
it'd be a little bit less expensive,
Got you.
right? Um, but we're doing readings. We did that reading in New York,
Right.
at Bohemian Hall,
Hmm.
and lots of people who are interested in Czech writing and all of that
Right.
came. And then we had a wonderful reception to the book at UCLA.
Awesome.
And so
Awesome.
I think, the more we get about and talk about it, the more people, it's not even about us, it's about Etta and Eva, because we want people to know about these women. I often think of our ancestors, and
Hmm.
every time I go anywhere to speak, I always say I have to pour libation, I which is rum, but
Girl, you
you
can.
can do it with water. And I never fail to thank my ancestors, our ancestors. And I see Eva Frank Marova as my ancestor as well, my
Yeah. Yeah.
sister, who struggled and fought and was resilient
Yeah. Right.
and didn't give up.
Yeah.
And so my strength comes from my people, because I know that I'm here because they held on.
Yeah.
Held on. When we were growing up, and when I was growing up in Trinidad, they didn't tell us anything about slavery.
Come
The
on.
British kept that
Under wraps.
QT,
Yeah.
quiet. So I had to educate my own self about my own history. And then, of course, Dr. Eric Williams in
Yes.
1965 or whatever it is, published a People's History of Trinidad and Tobago. For the first time, many people learned that we were descended from enslaved people, because
Come
our
on.
parents didn't want us to grow up with any sense of um,
Being lesser.
dissonance or difference. So
Yeah.
they didn't tell us that we didn't know anything back then when I was growing up in elementary school, and even first few years in high school, that my Indian neighbors had come as
Right.
indentured laborers.
Right.
I had to go back years after and take a picture of my mother's neighbor, our neighbor, Miss
Hmm.
Pullet, who had still had the indenture mark on her that had been put on her as a child.
Whoa.
This is a woman who gave me milk straight from her cow when I was a
Yeah.
child,
Right. Right. Right.
to strengthen me. And we had never known that
That
her
story.
mother had been brought as an indentured laborer, and that she had had a mark. And so reading. One of the reasons they want to get rid of history books, and is that they want people to be ignorant. Well, that's
Yeah.
totalitarianism.
Truly.
But our parents and grandparents are griots,
Hmm.
and we need to go to them and get our stories.
Yeah.
I tell my young writers who come through my classes, go to your parents, go to your grandparents when you go
Yes.
home for Thanksgiving, when you go to meet,
Yes.
talk to them, find out about what it's like. You don't have to be writing about these things, but at least you have your own library store of
That's right.
knowledge,
That's right.
right? No, and especially when I was teaching African American literature, I want my students to go, and not just black students, white students,
No.
because when we talk about African American literature, and I know this is going off a little bit off topic, but
All good.
um, talking about African American literature and teaching African American literature is teaching American literature.
Without a
You
doubt.
can't teach. I mean, how are you going to do
Without a doubt.
the very fact that it exists is
Right.
a result of
What America is.
the coming together, whether in heat, in pain,
Mm-hmm.
or in any other way
Mm-hmm.
between these groups of people.
No doubt.
So go home, talk to your older people, talk to your elders, respect your elders, and ask questions. If they
Yeah.
destroy the libraries, you were all griots.
Come
They are
on.
griots too. Get their stories. And I have one wonderful student who's he was just here this morning. He's going to do an honors thesis. His people are part Cherokee, part black, part white. His mother's white. And he's going to go to several mounds
Yeah.
and reservations and get
Right.
history,
Good.
and that for me, if nothing else good happens this year in terms of my teaching, that is rewarding.
Yeah, that's a
You
reward.
know. Anyway,
No, here
too
for
much
no,
going
no,
on.
no, no. There's so many gems. I couldn't interrupt. But before I let you go, I just want to say, as always, thank you not only for being here, but I always give you credit. Like when I was an English teacher, I always give you credit because you made me realize I could read and write stories about my people. You know what I mean? And just
Thank you,
and
Chris.
so thank you. Just got to put that on the record on the podcast.
Well, it's been a delight talking to you. Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's a joy. It is a
All
joy
right,
being with you.
take care.
Thank you all so much for being here. Until next time, make sure you check us at baddestchaplain.com. Till next time, take care, everyone. Peace.
Peace out, man.